This is Winning IR, a podcast exploring the diverse insights within the IR community. Join me, Mark Faskin, as I sit down with IROs and other IR stakeholders to discuss the winning strategies, tactics, and shifts in thinking that are redefining the profession. Fit in or stand out. Working in an industry whose principles stand on regulatory requirements and reporting, it can be easy to assume there's no room for innovation. Still, every day, modern IR teams show us that there is creativity to be found in the profession. Today's guests are the perfect example of innovators in the space. Alyssa Berry and Caroline Sawamoto are the principals and co-founders of irlabs, an investor relations, corporate communications, and corporate governance consultancy. Alyssa, Caroline, and their team are relentless IR strategists who are not afraid to push the envelope and bring a creative lens to the profession. We'll talk about how the role of IR has evolved to include more modern forms of communication and brand development, what makes for a compelling company story, their most memorable work, and how companies of all sizes can leverage creativity to stand out amongst the noise. So Caroline and Alyssa, to kick things off, I wanted to talk about an article I read recently talking about how IR needs a creative director. And it got me thinking, what creative elements can IROs incorporate into their programs? They're sort of different from the traditional way of doing things.
I love this question, Mark, and it's one that we talk about all the time and often refer to the investor relations profession as the junk drawer job, where you're wearing so many different hats and we're expected to be the analyst. We need to understand the financial statements inside and out. We need to be an excellent copywriter. We need to keep our C-suite organized. We're influencing strategy. I think a lot of IROs are now wearing the ESG hat as well, or those mandates are landing in the IR departments. We also need to be creatives and we need to know social media inside and out. There's just so much that has evolved over the last several years. And I would say since we started our careers 15 plus years ago, what our responsibilities or the scope of responsibilities has just expanded in such a great way. We, on the creative side, I really like how you phrased it as the creative director. We're all often refer to ourselves as the quarterback or the orchestrator. We try and do things a little bit differently, and I'll give you a bit of a flavor of some of the interesting ways we've tried to create visibility and engage investors over the last couple of years, and especially during these challenging markets over the last year. And we often refer to these as the investor relations stunts. And we know there's a lot of really great things we can do from a digital marketing perspective and getting earned media. But one of the things we've done, we did 8 IPOs this past year, and some of our clients actually have products or services that are tangible or that we would really like to put in front of, call it the retail or the broker community. And so just to give you an example, we took a company public that had a particular product and we put it in goodie bags with a nice little postcard and a QR code about the company, and we dropped it off at all the brokerage houses. And all of a sudden, overnight, you've got 1,000 investment advisors who know who the company is. And I think it almost comes back to, and not to get too philosophical, but I think in 2023, we're going to see a lot more of the fundamental investors come back who actually want to know and understand and touch and feel the product or the company that they're investing in. So that's just one example of us trying to think outside the box and find new ways to get in front of that community specifically.
That's awesome. I love that. It's interesting that you brought that up because I was on a panel recently and somebody was talking about road shows. And one of the things that they said was that they're finding that the reverse road show is really popular right now, that a lot of those, whether it's investors or analysts or whatever, they want to come to your office or they want to go to your factory or your lab or whatever it is and like see what it is that they're investing in. And I think it totally makes sense. Maybe it's just people want to travel.
I really like that. And I agree. And I think the investor days, we see them as this huge production that needs to happen with ton of planning and great big budgets. And yes, sometimes if you're going to take a group, to Europe, for example, that there's a price tag that comes with that. But now we have this great technology that we've been able to leverage over the last couple of years, where we've been able to do virtual investor days. We've had a client that did a site tour and brought investors through the back of the lab to give them a behind the scenes tour. There's just so much we can do now, really creatively. And you're right. I think people are just tired of sitting behind the screens.
As we record this on screens. That's awesome. Thank you. And so the next piece kind of gets into the storytelling side of things. And I think IRlabs does an amazing job of this, both I know for your clients, but also just for yourselves, looking at your social media presence and all the work that you do. And a big part of investor relations is that storytelling, right? It's how do you position the company? What's the opportunity? How do you communicate that out to all these different stakeholders? So in your opinion, what sets or what makes for a compelling story, and what differentiates a compelling story and a bland one? And what can IROs do to improve their storytelling?
Yeah, exactly what you said, Mark. Like, storytelling for investor relations is so important, and you want to be able to articulate it in a concise and clear way. The why, the what, where, when, and making sure that it's also engaging to the audience, and it's relevant and it's timely, and it's something that the investor is looking for in that messaging, right? And you also want to make it exciting with graphics or videos. That's a trend that we're seeing these days because of people's engagement level is very quick these days. So yeah, I think we do want to make sure that it is very creative and engaging and to the point.
And Mark, I think there's an opportunity for the IR professional to brand themselves. And I think there's a bit of a missed opportunity, probably because we're wearing so many different hats, as I referenced. But one of the things we really want, we think this is the best career. And it's the only job really that gets like full access to the C-suite. You're in the boardroom. You're influencing strategy and direction of a company. And we geek out on investor relations all the time, and we're really passionate about it. But I think for the IR professional themselves, there's a really neat opportunity to be that thought leader on LinkedIn and engage and really share your story of what goes on behind the scenes. We don't need to be too academic. We can, obviously, without breaching our material non-public information obligations, but sharing what's going on behind the scenes. What does a day in the life of an IRO look like? And that's what we're trying to disrupt.
Yeah, I like that idea of timeliness. For sure, the relevance factor is a big one. One of the questions, kind of a follow-up question I had to this is, how often do you find you are revisiting the story, if we want to call it that, or sort of revisiting the positioning of one of your clients? Like, is it a weekly? Is it a monthly? Is it quarterly?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I think it's important to regularly evaluate how the message is resonating with your audience. And we actually were just on a call earlier today with a client who is having a challenge in telling the story to particular VCs and family offices. And we worked through kind of peeling back the layers of maybe let's try this angle instead. But I do think it's really important for across the organization for the company to have the core 4, 5, 6, whatever it may be, a small number of the key pitch points. And even for your board of directors and for your senior management team, and really everyone across the organization can kind of speak to what the company is all about. I don't think there's enough emphasis on revisiting those points regularly. But we also don't need to reinvent the wheel on a regular occurrence as well. Sometimes we're talking to some of our issuers who are perhaps challenged in breaking into certain audiences, or certain strategies aren't working. Sometimes it's the strategy not the messaging, or maybe we're going to the wrong type of investor. So I think the question is a great one. I think it's a little bit complex, and it really depends on a number of different inputs.
Sorry, just to add, I think it's also important to see what milestones you have ahead, and making sure that you can kind of foreshadow certain things, or, showing investors that you're working towards these goals, and lay out the goals in advance, and then, execute as you go along and announce it, right? So, yeah, I think it's important to show those goals and achievements.
Agreed. Yeah, and it's actually a theme or trend, if you will, that's come up a few times in these podcast interviews, which is keeping it simple, right? Like, you start going into all this detail about, let me explain our whole industry and all the competitors and the business mind. Like, I think sometimes it's like investors' eyes glaze over, and it's like, wow, it's just too much information, right? It's like, to your point, what are those key points that you want them to walk away with? Or it's like, if there were only 3 things that you're going to take out of this meeting, you want to make sure that you're driving those home.
That's it. Who you are, how you're different, and how you're going to make investors money. Like, how, show me the pathway to growth and profitability. It's really that simple.
For everybody that can't see, I'm doing the money rubbing my fingers thing. So as we talked about, I mean, you've done some. I love the IR stunts. So you've done some great ones over the years. What would you say is some of your most memorable work? What was one of those projects where you really felt like you went above and beyond? It was really differentiated.
I think the biggest, we get asked this question from time to time. So the biggest achievement for us over the past year, we took public one of the first all-women board and C-suite companies based out of Chicago, called the Planting Hope Company. And we really were able to come out with a bang. And that was just a really nice opportunity to be a part of something that diverse and groundbreaking for the exchanges in Canada. So that was definitely a key highlight for us in terms of our work over the last year. I don't know, Caroline, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, no, I love, it was very fun taking the company public and getting front page Globe and Mail article about the company, because it is so groundbreaking, right? So yeah, and we've done a lot of IR stunts related to multiple clients. For example, we did a virtual investor day where we featured, some clients, and we did giveaways. For example, right now we're doing a 12 days giveaways for the holidays, and featuring some of our clients' products. We're just trying to put our clients in front of as many eyeballs as possible in a creative way. So yeah, it's a lot of fun doing it too.
That's great. Awesome. We recently did a survey with all of our clients, and I guess it actually went beyond clients. It was just sort of a more general one. And one of the top challenges that we heard, especially for small and mid-cap companies going into 2023, was finding some of these creative ways to stand out. We've talked a little bit about sort of like virtual investor days. We talked a little bit about the giveaways, or sort of getting like the tangible product in people's hand. Any other ways or any other things that IROs can do to sort of cut through the noise?
Yeah, this is another really great question, and I wish we had the magic answer to how to be able to get in front of every investor possible. But one of the things that I think a tactic or tool, if you will, that's not leveraged enough is the thought leadership, the ebooks, the downloadable white papers. There's so many things, so many companies or issuers doing in very disruptive industries doing things differently. And to the extent that you can lock those down, where you get an email address that you need to enter before you download it and following up, that's one unique way. We've been trying to incorporate some of that with our clients, but haven't seen a ton of that really being leveraged, but find a lot of success in it. And one of the things we also do, and this is going to sound a little archaic, but building relationships the good old fashioned way. So everyone wants to spend a lot of money on digital marketing, and hopefully it solves all of our problems. And we have all these investors that come, and hopefully they're sticky, but some will be and a lot won't be. Actually getting out there and meeting investors, but nurturing and following up with leads as well. Often we find there's so many names in the database that you've met at conferences, and they showed up to your investor day, and they were part of the investor roadshow 2 years ago. And we consider these warm leads. And often they end up in a database where now they're getting your news. But being able to actually follow up with that person and say, even call it a handwritten email, wanted to share with you, we've had a really successful quarter. Here's a few of the key highlights. Wondering if you're still following the work that we're doing. Let me know if you want to catch up. Making sure we spend the time with that TLC. It's extra work, and it's hard, but we think that it's worth the effort.
Yeah, we've heard from portfolio managers getting a thank you email from the CEO, after the meeting or after the conference call, or even after the raise, the financing they've done and they participated. Like getting that personalized thank you email is super helpful.
You actually brought up, and it's sort of a small thing, but I feel like it does really make a difference on a call that we had the other day, Caroline, which was, you said even having an email that goes out when somebody signs up for your newsletters that has just a summary of, hey, thanks for subscribing, and here's some information on the company, maybe recent things that have happened, like those little touches. It's almost like thinking about it as like a customer experience, right? Like everybody who's interacting with your brand, like what are those little ways that you can, like what the surprise and delight sort of thing. I think that those are awesome. And I think sometimes, people, it's like you throw up the IR website and you start doing your press releases and you put everything on the site, and I feel like sometimes it can get forgotten a little bit.
Well, that's why we leverage Irwin, Mark. We
shameless plug.
You meet an investor and they say, you know what, call me in 2 months after the quarter's over, and then you actually call them in 2 months because we put our notification in and logged the notes, and there you go.
Yeah, awesome. So another thing, and we were just talking about this before we started, but you are both extremely organized and concise, and which made planning this podcast much easier. And so the next thing I actually want to talk about is the IR plan, because you're going into a lot of these companies and you're basically like building these programs in some cases from the ground up. And I feel like there's been a fair amount of instances lately where I've heard people asking, what goes into an IR plan? Like, what are people putting in there? So what are some of the things that you're often adding to the IR plan that you think are really important, or maybe things that you think get overlooked?
I think the way that we approach investor relations plans with any company, whether we're taking them public or they're already an existing public issuer, we want to know and really understand who owns us today and who do we want to have own us. And it's the most simple question, but not enough emphasis is put on this. And I think it's really important for the investor relations professional to have that conversation with the C-suite. And sometimes there can be very big debate or differing views on how that shareholder base should look. And I say that because the tactics that we implement are going to be relying on whatever the response of that is. I met a company recently that they have very, very, very strong institutional ownership and really not enough retail, they admit. But that was very much by design. They built that shareholder base deliberately for specific reasons that have actually worked extremely well for them. And in terms of the investor relations plan itself, I think, of course, we want to address and work through what are the key objectives and targets and as IR professionals, we're always trying to struggle with how are we proving our value and how do you deliver on that? Often, liquidity and trading price is the only two things that often we hear. But there's so much other work that we're doing to nurture relationships and to get other things prepared as well. In terms of the plan itself, other areas that were there's your typical plan of conferences and events and different initiatives like that, but adding in some of these extra out of the box activities that we've referenced. So maybe there's putting the old fashioned marketing hat on. Maybe there's a really neat sponsorship opportunity that will get really great visibility because there's a lot of investors there. I think that thinking outside the box category is one that we really need to try and incorporate a little bit more. And it's one that we add to our plans for our issuers.
Great.
I don't know if that helps.
And yeah, just to add to that, I think in terms of key messages, creating, once you understand, what the company does and who are the investors, what's the story, what are some of the key milestones coming up, and you want to be able to create that strategic messaging for the company that, we can always look back to it and draw upon whenever we write news releases or, when we update their corporate deck and making sure those key messages come through. We also look at the competitive landscape of the company, peer analysis, and, look at their competitors and do a pretty thorough research and analysis on their peers, their analysts, looking at, analyst targets and investor targets. So, I think that should all be part of your plan. So you can keep track and make sure that you execute against your plans.
Awesome. Sort of going back to something that Alyssa was saying earlier, which was there's this example of this client who felt that they should have more retail. I feel like, retail has been a huge topic over the last year or so. And a lot of companies that I think are trying to understand how to engage with our retail audience, how we better understand who they are. And we hear that a lot from our clients, who are pulling NOBO lists and doing a lot of digital marketing. And there's some really interesting solutions that have cropped up around that. What are some of the sort of successful ways you've seen companies engage with that retail audience?
Yeah, cracking the retail nut is a really hard one, and we've seen some really great work on the digital marketing side. We're working with a couple of clients right now where we ourselves are putting together some really great drip campaigns and getting a lot of really great traction. So what we're finding is those, because we can see the analytics, call it the retail, the brokers, the high net worths, the day traders, they're forwarding this information on to their friends as well. So having a really strong call to action and developing content that is has that little sense of FOMO or excitement around it, where you want to send it along to get someone else's thoughts or to say, look, I think there's something here, take a look. So that's one way. And I think leveraging the earned media side of things, really putting in the effort and the time to properly pitch and choose wisely where you're spending your time and your dollars. There's some really decent pay to play type of newsletters that are still, I really do believe newsletters are a bit of a thing of the past, but there's a few out there that call them the legacy publications that are really good as well. I think all of that needs to be part of the various plan. There's no one tactic. It's really leveraging all of these different tactics and trying a bunch of different things. If you're able to get on BNM Bloomberg, God bless you, and that's wonderful. But a lot of these top tier ways of getting earned media also require certain market cap and revenue to be able to achieve. So it's not easy, but we try and get very creative and really try a bunch of different things to see what's going to work best for the client.
The drip campaign, just kind of going back to that for a second, because I recently spoke to a company I don't know how we got onto the topic, but we were talking about their database of newsletter subscribers. I think they said that they had something like 15,000. And when I asked what they were doing with that audience, they said nothing really, just updating. When we put out a press release, we send the email, or if we have any news, we send an email. But it just seemed kind of the standard stuff. So what sort of things would you put in that drip campaign? Is it more product information? Is it company updates? Is it more from an investment angle, or is it all of the above?
So there are different ways we do drip campaigns. So, for example, one, we would send, the welcome email to the new subscriber. And then after that, we follow up with a personalized email, saying that, hey, if you would like to, set up a meeting with us or talk to the management team, please let us know. And then, there's also another, campaign that we would encourage people to look at the deck. So we'll set up, a nice email talking about the company, the investment highlights, and then we push buttons for people to click on, check out the deck or check out our website. And so there's many different ways where you do drip campaigns. And then once they click, then we know, oh, wow, this person is interested. And then we do follow-up email asking, hey, would you like to have a one-on-one meeting with management team? So yeah, there are different ways. One other drip campaign that we've done is forwarding it to a friend. So, here's a little bit of information about the company, kind of like tease them a little bit. And then it's got buttons like forward to a friend. And that also helps with, growing your database, right? So yeah, lots of different ways.
When we have special events, we also put in there, come join, coffee with Mark. And, you're there for half an hour to give a bit of an informal investor update. Those are really easy wins in our view.
Yeah, I think that's great. And as you both know, I think a lot of retail investors feel like they don't get those opportunities, right? They don't get the opportunities to speak to management. So that idea of like a coffee chat or fireside chat or office hours or something like that, I think is kind of cool. And at the end of the day, when we talk about retail, it's just a lot of work, right? Like it takes that effort. I mean, Caroline, to your point of like sending a personalized thank you and doing that follow up, and it just takes time, but I think it bears fruit if you do it consistently.
Yeah, even with the digital, right? Like if you're responding to every Twitter message, if you were trying to get engagement, that's how you have to do it. You have to comment on every single message and engage with them, follow them, comment on their post. And so they can follow you back and, engage with you. So yeah, it is a lot of work.
So I'm just like picturing you having like all of the different clients on your various Twitter accounts, or having like 50 different phones that you're having to manage. All right. So we're almost up on time. And so my final question is, which I sort of ask everyone, which is, we've covered a lot of ground, a lot of different things for people to think about in terms of how they can be more creative when it comes to their IR program and sort of marketing program. For somebody who's listening, what would be one or two tips that you'd want them to take away from today's podcast? Caroline, you first.
We know markets are tough, and we always encourage all of our clients or anyone we talk to be engaged with your current shareholders and, people who are in your community, who know you, your partners, your stakeholders, because you want to be able to keep them engaged and nurture those relationships. And because we know it is tough markets, but if you nurture relationships now, then you can always develop that, and when the time is right for you to raise money, then you can go back to those relationships, right? So just make sure you nurture those relationships that you have today.
And I'll throw in something we haven't talked about yet as one last hurrah. One of the things that I think needs a little bit disruption, and we've had some fun with our issuer clients, is the earnings call. And the old way of reading a 6-page script, and we know that everyone just wants to catch the Q&A. They just want to hear what's going on at the end. And there's a lot of them are still done via conference call, where to me, I don't even know how to set up conference calls anymore. Everything is Teams and Zooms and all of that. So I think there's a real neat opportunity to make sure that we're incorporating that virtual component to those earnings calls. And the best way to build relationships, not just with investors, but even all of us with friends and personally, is seeing people face to face and kind of seeing the white in their eyes. And to the extent that you can incorporate that video piece to the earnings call, I think would be really interesting. The reason why a lot of people don't do it is because you don't want to look at someone reading a 6-page script for half an hour. So my perspective on this is throw away the script, refer to your MD&A and press release that everyone presumably would have taken a peek at, and just jump right into answering questions and engaging with your investors.
Couldn't agree more. I recently have listened to a few of these earnings calls, and yes, they can be very scripted and very dry, and I'm sure there's lots of ways to make them more interesting. Awesome. Well, this has been great. Thank you so much for the time. Love following what you're doing at irlabs. I think it's awesome, and hopefully we'll be able to do this again soon.
Thanks for the opportunity, Mark. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks. I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Winning IR. For more winning ideas, make sure to subscribe to this podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Irwin, a better way to manage investor relations. For more information, visit www.getirwin.com.